And I was going to make kind of, and I suppose one of the biggest things that we do see is this kind of, what we all know is a kind of effectively like a revolution in contracting. And I think most legal teams are having to tackle it, and most companies are having to tackle it. And I guess my points kind of fall into five buckets, actually, that I was going to say, the things that I'm just sort of asked to share, some of the things that we're seeing. Some of the stuff that really interests me the most, and I suppose a lot of you are going to be familiar with Oliver Hart and presumably saw the latest HBR article. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth having a look at. On kind of relational contracting. And you can call it relational contracting, or you could call it agile contracting. And I think it's one of the fascinating movements that's happening within business, because what we talk to a lot of chief procurement officers and a lot of finance CFOs, as well as the general counsel. And there's a real pressure coming from procurement and sales. So kind of think about this whole point of ownership, about, saying, well, we've got to do contracting differently. And if the system and the processes and the technology isn't working for us and we can't change this fast enough, then maybe we just have to change fundamentally the way in which we do contracts. So HSBC, for example, are talking about doing agile contracting, where they kind of like don't have a defined sort of list of deliverables, and there are terms that are kind of fluid within that. We've seen sort of this kind of idea of relational contracting between Accenture and Microsoft, who have got kind of like outsourcing contracts, which is all sort of focused on productivity, and they've sort of managed to reduce sort of the number of systems that they use from like 140 to 40, amazing kind of gains. But the idea is that they improve the productivity in their sort of joint ventures, and they sort of changed the way that they do contracting and sort of made it more kind of principles based, and flexible and fluid and able to change quickly. And I think those are quite interesting. It's an interesting sort of philosophical dimension to the whole contracting piece. Related to that, you've got, we were talking to the CPO of AstraZeneca the other day, who was saying, actually, I want to have frictionless trade. And what does that mean? It means, just agreeing the contracts, taking the lawyers out of it, taking the contract managers out of it, and having an agreed set of terms that is industry wide for sort of supply contracts. And I think these are all quite dramatic moves, and a reflection of the kind of frustration that I think people are seeing. On a sort of coming down from that very big picture, I suppose, point of view, I suppose what we are seeing is that lots of companies are sort of connecting their systems. So the whole, being able to connect your CLM systems to your sales systems. The very famous example is of DXC Technology. When they merged CSC systems, and they merged about 5 years ago, they suddenly had tripled the volume of contracts they were doing, and doubled in complexity. But they still managed to, the legal team managed to actually handle that. And they did it through a combination of things like outsourcing, right sourcing, tech. But one of the critical things that their head of sales said to me was the reason that they managed to do so well was because they connected their contracting system to Salesforce. And I suppose that's what we're seeing across the board, the impact of enterprise-wide technology. You're seeing that sort of in Vodafone, for example, did something where they integrated their CLM system with Ignite, their CRM system, and effectively they reckon that by doing that, they managed to sort of lower customer churn, and their contract analytics team identified £1.34 million a year in additional revenue from customer target spend shortfalls. And I think that's, to the whole point of value leakage, when you can do that kind of connectivity, there is such huge gains to be made. So other really big trend is self-service. That's massively sort of happening. Again, you're seeing Vodafone sort of pushing that out. Big example of that is maybe Daimler and Icertis. Kind of had to, Daimler, you can imagine, it's an old German car maker. completely had the same procurement system for about 25 years or something, something like this was what they told us. And within 5 months, they'd changed the way that they did procurement, reduced the contracting cycle from 6 weeks to 1 week, and being able to sort of record over 500,000 suppliers and obligations. They were just, the efficiency gains were kind of phenomenal. And I guess we've got Mohammed on the call, and I suppose the last thing I'd say, which I think is, and you sort of haven't talked about this, but I guess it's sort of to the idea of the what is happening within the contracting space, was the whole idea of visual contracting, which Shell obviously did with the WCC or the IACCM beforehand. But it's really, I think, thinking about the kind of the benefits of visual contracting. I think it's Mohammed, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like 8,000 procurement contracts are automatically generated a year, and now 70% of the contracts are now reviewed and sent back without needing the human touch. I mean, so, but I think these are all sort of movements forward. The other point I'd actually say is another thing around which I think we haven't really mentioned is design thinking. Accenture has trained 1,000 sort of its contract sort of management staff and design thinking, and again sort of trying to take a more big picture human touch to the contracting, and again I suppose fundamentally in that is getting back to that whole question of why are we doing this, what's the purpose of it, and making contracting a much more sort of human-centered process, but also one where risk is evaluated in quite a different way. So that's my very, very quick 10 minutes of the big trends. I suppose it's relational contracting, agile contracting, moving towards frictionless trade, which is the big kind of philosophical thing, and then obviously it's connecting systems, self-service, and then this whole impact of design thinking and visual contracting.